We're recording.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Self-Publishing Podcast. Today's episode is going to be storytelling for social change. Our guest is going to be Laura Leigh Clarke, and Dave is really going to enjoy talking to Laura because she has a fantastic British accent. Can I get a round of applause from Dave on that?
I don't do that.
Oh.
I don't harass our female guests because then that's right. I do it to the guys because I'm not being all creepy. But if I do it to the girls, it's like, oh, Dave's being creepy.
That's sexist. It's equal opportunity.
Oh, be
You
creepy.
should harass all of our English people.
Because right now everybody's just decided that you're gay and that's what that's all about. You're just trying to...
I'm not the one grabbing a handful of whatever Sean was earlier.
That's right.
Peanuts.
Oh, okay.
Dirty.
All right. So that's what we're going to be doing when Laura comes on in a bit. Anybody have something cool?
Yeah, sure. All right. Well, so I started Westworld, but I'm not deep in enough for that to be something cool other than, damn, it's good. I'm only on episode 3, but I already love it more than I expected. I expected to love it a lot. So that's fun. Another thing that I'm not too deep in that I can't really recommend other than to say I've been waiting for this for a long time and I'm excited to see that it's there is that Horace and Pete from Louis C.K. is on Hulu now, which is really great because I really wanted to watch that when Louis was selling it on his site, but I didn't really want to watch on my laptop. And so it's cool that it's on Hulu. I watched the first 10 minutes of the first episode and then had to go pick up Haley. So I just got a taste, but that seems really cool. But my actual something cool is Silly. And it's
Wait a minute. You just gave us two almost something cool.
I don't even trust that you guys have something cool because we just recorded the last episode.
Right. I'm feverishly trying to think of one.
Oh, well, okay. See, so you can do that. But I love carpool karaoke. Have you guys ever seen carpool karaoke? This seems like something Dave will make fun of me about.
With James Corden?
Yeah.
Yeah, I refuse to like him because he took...
This seems like a good first show ever thing.
Craig Ferguson, that was his old show, and then this guy comes on, and he's not Craig Ferguson. Goodbye.
Okay, but he's
that bastard.
There's no room in my heart for him.
He's still likable, and carpool karaoke is still awesome. So it's always fun if you. It's basically just James is in the car pretending like he needs help getting to work by having someone in the passenger seat so he can drive carpool, and then they coincidentally find songs on the radio that are this artist's songs, and then they sing them together. And James is really fun and highly adaptable, and it's kind of amazing that he can sing right there with Adele or Bruno Mars or Madonna. He pretty much keeps up with anyone who's in the car.
He did plays and stuff. He is a talented guy.
He's very talented. The one with the Michelle Obama is super fun. They're just really, really fun. And he sings his ass off. He has a Tony? I did not know that.
I must be a different sort of person because I have no interest in watching this show.
Well, they're like 10 to 15 minutes on YouTube, and I started watching them because Cindy wants to watch them. So she's like, "Hey, let's watch a carpool karaoke," and now it's our thing. Like when we have like 20 minutes, and we'll just watch a carpool karaoke. I think I've seen them all, but they're a lot of fun. And so anyway, if you like,
you had to have a thing to combat my 600-pound life or whatever is.
Oh my God, I saw a 600-pound life last night. Actually. Yeah. I watched another one. It was the one with Charity, and it was literally.
We don't know.
Oh, that one. I've never seen it.
Oh, Charity, yeah.
Yeah, Charity was 758 pounds, and it was just really sad. Like she had like.
Are we really talking?
No.
The worst show ever.
Yeah. Why is this on the air? Okay, so Dave, what is your something cool?
My something cool is that I finally finished the story that we're writing.
What?
Yes, if it's the one we're working on for the Apprentice project. It's our thriller, first book in a thriller series, and if you recall, longtime listeners of a few months ago, if you recall, my computer died and took my progress with it, and I was very, very distraught, disappointed, and all of those things.
You weren't paranoid enough.
Yeah. So
time to start being paranoid.
So I basically had to start over. And fortunately, I had the beats that we had written. And that was like one of the, if I was just pantsing the story and I had not like had the beats that Sean and I wrote together, and I don't know where I would have gone. Like,
I would like to cut
lost.
in here real quick too, because I almost did this as my something cool, but I wanted to wait until next week when I was already finished with it. But I'm very much I'm a good ways through it, and I can confidently say that this is CI's best book. This is really, really great. And I wanted to actually tell Dave that off the air, but whatever, we're live. But it is. It's CI's best book. It's fantastic. I love everything about it. And just yay.
The thing about that is that they have, that they were able to create their best book because why? Because you were just winging it, right, guys?
No, because we had the outline, and we had an outline that we got some help with.
You guys have each other, though. Most people don't have that, and then they're fucked because they have no way to see if their outline is any good.
Well, fortunately, we got something.
Do they have anything to lose? Do they have anything to lose if they
Story Jackets by Clarke.
These are bad in a different way.
These are just bad.
There's no way to win either, because the last one I did straight and it sounded terrible.
Yeah, but this is worse.
If you'd like help getting your story together, finding out if you've got plot holes, and like, okay, seriously, like usually I go through a story, it is completely pantsing it. Like I will write stuff out ahead of time, but I'm gonna go wildly off course. And having that there, having this thing that Sean did and Clarke helped out with, it really helped me because like I said, I'd lost a few weeks, and now I had a guide to help me find the story again. And yeah, I still go off. I'm still going to pants a good chunk of my story, but having that there really saved me the time of, I had the confidence that this was here and this story will work. And now I can just build on that. And that's something that I would not have without the outline.
Yeah, the structure of the book is fantastic. It really is. And like what Bake says in here, story jackets save time and reduce frustration. I think that's very well said. And the structure of our book, we haven't said the name, right?
No, we haven't.
Okay, yeah. The structure of that book is very solid. It's made it a very enjoyable read. And I think a lot of that is that pre-production and story jacket work.
All right, so if you want to get your own story jacket from our developmental editor, Clark Chamberlain, or if you have a romance story and you want romance story jacketing, which we are calling a story garter, same link. It's sterlingandstone.net/storyjacket. And I think we're eventually going to split that out, but for now it's sterlingandstone.net/storyjacket for both. And book yours, and that way you too will be able to write CI's best book.
Yeah, I'd also like to answer Edward's question too, which he says, is it worthwhile to story jacket a book 2 if you didn't do book 1? Yeah, absolutely. I think, in fact, book 2s for me personally are the hardest thing to map out. I think that book 3s I usually find the sweet spot, and book 1s are really fun. But book 2, if you look at our catalog, book 2s are usually where I'm weakest, and I wish I'd had story jackets for every book 2 I've ever written before.
All right. So with that done, we'll welcome our guest, Laura Leigh Clarke.
Hey, Laura Leigh Clarke. So Laura is one of these people that has so much going on, it's very difficult to introduce her in a sentence. But
professional geek. That's
professional geek. Oh, we like that. My favorite thing about Laura has nothing to do with you, listener. I'm sorry. It's that her favorite thing that we wrote is plug. And that just makes me so delighted because I think like 9 people in the world have read Plugged, and Laura is one of them. And so Plugged, if you don't know, is a book that Johnny and I wrote in between Beam Season 1 and Season 2 as a fake nonfiction book to explain the world of the Beam to ourselves. But Laura read it as like future history and really dug it.
It changed my life, Sean. Seriously.
Oh, how is that?
Well, it inspired me to go and write you said, you gave the last little nudge, go write some fiction, some sci-fi. And knowing, like seeing you guys and how you approach sci-fi with like all the hardcore science. I mean, Johnny's calculations fucking blew my mind. But apart from that, you've got all of these different layers of like the social, like intersecting with the political, and like seeing it through the lens of like an entrepreneur versus someone who's employed and the struggles that they go through, and then the science that kind of happened with the technology and the moon stuff. Oh my God, it was incredible. Like,
Well,
I didn't want to write sci-fi until I read that book.
Oh, well, that's pretty awesome. Thank you very much. And now you are writing sci-fi, and this all came about. We could talk about the whole journey here, right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so you're doing like a storytelling summit, and Laura's basic premise is which we all stand by and love, which is that you can change the world with story. Like that was.
I feel like I've heard that before.
Right, that was the tagline for Fiction Unboxed. And the whole idea is that you can change the world with
You
story.
thief.
The narrative.
Awful, Johnny.
But yeah, you just picked that right out of our back pocket. But it's cool. We're good. But yeah, the idea that you really can change the world with a story, and that the characters that we put in and the situations that we give them, that movie Tomorrowland very much was leaning into this idea. That was a live action film. Disney film shot by Brad Bird, who did Iron Giant and Ratatouille and The Incredibles. And that was, his movie with George Clooney. And it was all about how we have had all these post-apocalyptic movies for so long that we're basically teaching ourselves that this is the reality that we're going to have. And so Laura's premise is, no, we create the world that we want through the fiction that we tell. So I guess that's as good a place to start as any. And so Laura was saying, I want to build this thing. And Laura is really connected. And so she has a lot of people who can speak on her behalf when she's building the summit. But we said, hey, if you want to really, really have authority here, then you should start writing. You should write your own books, your own sci-fi series, and get that going. And then you're coming at it helping with other authorities' voices here, but also on the ground level, I did this too. So that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Thank you. Hi. No, you've done it. What do you want me to say?
Well, it was nice having you, Laura Leigh Clarke.
Really lovely to see you again, Sean. Like, we'll catch up sometime, right? Over a flat white.
You should talk more than Sean because you've got the great accent. So
I am effectively shutting up right now.
There you go.
Okay, so let me tell you about it then. So that's exactly where the sci-fi came about. The project kind of bounced out of Virtually Everything Story, which was the summit that we did over the summer. And during the mythology class, of course, the Orlando atrocity had just happened, and so gun crime was this thing, and like, what are we doing, giving lunatics guns and all this kind of stuff. And in the mythology class, we kind of touched on it, and this was with our mythologist, Pamela J. Smith, who's also a screenwriter. And she said that cultures actually create our mythologies. Our cultures are created by our mythologies. And because America was founded on the Wild Wild West, the right to bear arms and all this kind of stuff, they're kind of saying, it's no wonder that there is this big problem with guns in the States, the kind of problems that you don't see anywhere else because no one else has these kind of mythologies. And so I kind of like off the cuff went, oh, so the way to change this would be to change the stories that we have around guns and weapons. And so she goes, exactly. And so we started having more of these conversations, and we spoke John Truby, who was one of our experts on the think tank that I'll tell you about shortly. And he was like, yeah, it wasn't quite the Wild Wild West. It was more to do with da-da-da-da. And we got into like the politics of and the nuances. And I was like, this is worthy of a detailed discussion. Now, meanwhile, like over the last few years, I've been talking to a guy called Tom Chi, who is like a super genius, like you wouldn't believe. And he's the former head of Google X and also the inventor of the Google glasses. And he's like really into this, doing social good and making sure that that you can shift the economies of small nations so that you're swapping out the gross domestic product for the gross happiness product and all this kind of stuff, making sure that people in
Dave
Mexico
does not believe in anything called a gross happiness product.
Yeah, I saw the
Unless you mean gross in a very different way.
Oh no. Dave. But yeah, and like making sure that places have clean water and all this kind of thing. And because he's been so effective in engineering and technology, when he applies his thinking skills to these kind of problems, he gets incredible results really quickly. So, you know, he does a lot of consulting in like social things, but also in corporate stuff. And we started talking about these specific things, and he'd just go, I'd be going, well, maybe what we need to do is, no, that wouldn't work because such and such, such and such. I'm like, okay, dude, you need to be on the discussion. So we've got Pamela J. Smith, John Truby, and Tom Chi on the think tank. But in like a prequel to that, we kind of need the information from all of these different experts. So I've been talking to you know, people who are peacekeepers or have been peacekeepers in very violent African states to talk to them about not just what are the problems on the ground, because everyone talks about the problems, but what are the solutions? And you know, they're coming up with solutions like take trained police officers who are working in hostile territories like, you know, New York Bronx, for instance, and bring them across to Africa and teach them, get them to teach the people on the ground how to police, because military personnel don't have those kind of skills. They don't have that soft touch to be able to connect with people and, you know, get proper governance in place. And then we're talking about different ways of creating proper governance and how different social factors will affect what happens on the ground. And then the things about how nations, that the idea of a nation is kind of obsolete now because we're so interconnected. One of the other reasons why I loved Plugged and the concept of interconnectivity. It means that we don't have borders anymore. So where the nations are trying to say, okay, we've got all of these security issues and migration issues, like, well, screw that, that's not the problem. The world has fundamentally changed, and we need solutions to be able to combat that change. And it means probably bringing in like NGOs, non-government organizations, and creating a bridge between what's happening on the ground, what's happening at the national level, and, you know, a whole load of other shifts that we get into in these expert interviews. We also talk to economists and people who have, like, filmmakers as well. We've talked to Leslie Edwin, who created West is West and then East is East, and she created a documentary called India's Daughter, which I thoroughly recommend looking at. And she's got real solutions to ending violence against women. And so there isn't an area of doing social good that we haven't touched on and that we're not, you know, trying to pull into this think tank to then be able to kind of distill out the main tipping points that need to happen in the world as we have it today, and then create a future that's better for tomorrow.
Okay, so the end game here is about as big as they get, which is changing the world, right?
Yeah, we weren't kidding.
Nothing small. Nothing small.
Johnny, it's not just a tagline.
Yeah, well, right. Well, it actually fits yours way better than it fit ours. Like, we were shoehorning in that shit.
Yeah. So that is such a lofty, worthy goal. So what is it for the average author? Like, what does she have in her horizon? What should she be paying attention to if she wants to change the world with her story? What are the kinds of things that she should be doing to make that happen?
Right. Well, as story is the only way to kind of shift the consciousness, rather than information doesn't work. We know that. And weaving it into story, whether you're writing like an indie novel or a script or whatever, you want to kind of soak that consciousness into the world that you're building. So we've got people who are experts in world building who are showing you how to take these kind of lofty concepts. Like, once you know them, it becomes a shit ton easier to write them into your story. But then they're showing you how to build out the world so that the frame that you're using as you're writing your story is kind of infused with it, but then also how to relate your plot to those things as well. So that then a story about whatever your idea is then can do that good almost, I want to say kind of like almost like you're brainwashing your reader a little bit, but in a really good way.
Well, so it's propaganda. You're saying you're writing propaganda.
but it is propaganda, because people don't want to hear go out and physically pick up shovels or whatever it is and go change the world. I mean, it's too much work. What difference am I going to make? And but the stories that we, you know, people passively observe, they watch TV, they watch movies, they read books, and those are the stories that they do make a difference in a very
affect the way we think,
underlying sort of way. When you look at some of the, I can't think of any good examples right now, maybe you guys will be able to, but some of the stuff that is happening in the world today, and you look back to, you know, that wasn't okay. So the way that we see, LGBT people, anybody with a non, sort of heterosexual sexuality, like a lot of that change has been brought by, new TV programming that's about it. Like think of like Transparent and the L World.
Sense8, right?
Sense8. It's just characters who are, even if the show isn't anything about that, you have a character who is gay or something, and it's like, people are much more accepting of those things today because of the stories. It's not
like let's talk about the Future of Sex, right? Like that, there's that whole storyline in Future of Sex where they're trying to normalize sex, and so there's this whole ad campaign,
and they do it very covertly. This is a Beam World story,
but they do it through story, right? They do it through story. So some of our characters are they're writing stories very intentionally to change the temperature of the way people think about sex,
and they're doing that for profit, but it's the same sort of thing. It's a sex company doing it so they can sell more if sex is more normalized, but it is the same concept.
So Laura, let's get specificals, right? All right. So if you have, clearly you're like the first student here doing this, right? Because now you're writing your series and you're basing it on this methodology and the concepts that the think tank is, developing. So how did that work for your series? Like, as you're planning this out, what elements have you put into it? What kind of change are you hoping to affect? And how is that working for you as an author?
Right. Okay. So to begin with, it was. Do you want me to talk about methodology or the effect? There were a lot of questions in there.
Well, both. I'd love to know what your end game is. So you clearly have something that you want to say. That's why you're writing the books.
Right.
So what is it that you want to say? What if your books 10 years from now have done everything that you set out for them to do? What's that going to be? And then how did you go about weaving that into the narrative so it wasn't heavy-handed, right? Because the worst thing is when, like, okay, so using Plugged and the Beam as an example, it is, I know we wrote it, but whatever. It is well done in the way that it takes
very well done.
It was
so well done. I read the whole thing on the plane on the way home after Austin.
It was so you have you have directorate and you have enterprise, right? And they're diametrically opposed political parties. And anyone who reads that and thinks that we're choosing a side is clearly bringing their own baggage into it, because I think we very much explore both sides. And so if we were really heavy-handed, Johnny and I are clearly enterprise people. We're not wired to be directorate at all, but we're not telling the reader they should be enterprise at all, right? We're very much just telling our story. And so you don't want to be heavy-handed, and you don't want to, if it's going to be propaganda, fine, but it needs to be great propaganda, which means subtle. So how do you keep your ideas subtle and yet powerful? Because that's what an author needs to do.
Right. Okay. And do you know how you and Johnny took me aside in the corridor and you said, do this? It was exactly that was the secret sauce in that.
Okay.
And
I say a lot of things, so you're going to have to remind me what I said.
Oh, because I'm not telling anyone what it was. It's secret sauce. No, I'm joking. So basically, they told me that write out the timeline first. So, you go from whatever the date is now to what something happens. You've got
I remember this.
Future, right? And then you go to 1,000 years into the future. And what is the result of that? And so I imagined, okay, so what if Trump won the election and everything went to shit? And then obviously Trump did win the election. So I was like, okay, I hope by not writing this, I'm not making it happen. But
you don't have that much power.
Just alienating all the Trump voters.
It's only half of America, don't worry.
Whatever. He's in power, and we've got to kind of just deal with it. But it's like, well, what are the consequences of something like that happening? And like with let's take something like women's issues, where women are treated badly, and they get a lot of there's permission for men to treat women badly. So then women rise up, and it creates another social conflict. And then you can kind of map all of that out. Then you can do the same with race and map all that out over the next 1,000 years. And some of those things, they're more detailed in the near future than they are in the far future. So you've got to forget about like the far future for some of it. Just hope that somewhere along the line, what is it that you really want to see happen? Well, absolute total equality. So then you put that at the end game of the 1,000 years. What about technology? Well, what technology is really kind of happening now? And, you know, I talked with Tom about this, and he was saying, oh, well, we've got internet over in hot air balloons so that you can have internet all over the place. And I'm like, yeah, but that's still kind of Wi-Fi. You still need, you know, beacons and stuff. How would you transfer a message from here to, and I looked up where the next exocolonies were, you know, exoplanets could possibly be, and you're looking at 400 to 600 light years away. So it's like, well, how do you transmit distances over, you know, messages over that kind of distance? The only way to do it is going to be through entanglement, I reckon. And you know, there's a physics background here as well. And how do you store huge amounts of data? Well, they're storing it on DNA molecules.
Evercrunch.
Evercrunch. What?
Oh, see, that's
why does Evercrunch not use quantum entanglement for its delivery system?
It's going to be written onto DNA. That's the only way, because then it's stable and you can like stick it into storage, like in somewhere like the Arctic, and it will stay forever. So, you know, there are those kind of things that you can kind of pull in and go, okay, so that's the end result. And like the thing that had just happened in like the last kind of 100 years before the story is set, things like teleportation actually being a reality, because there are problems, there are ethical issues and all this kind of thing. So like you've got all of these different tracks, at least this is how I was doing it, the different tracks. So you've got the technology and the science, you've got the political stuff, you've got the social stuff, you've got the well, whatever else. And you have to like run a track. I even looked at things like the geo, what's it called? The geography of the planet. So you know how you've got plate tectonics moving and stuff. And you guys did this in the beam, didn't you? But I asked, well, what about the ice age, and when is the next ice age due? And what about climate change? Because climate change is also a big thing that we want to, you know, look at. And then what happens? And then the beauty of being able to go to different planets is that you can talk about the what if you had another planet and you didn't pollute it, or what if you had another planet and you didn't start rearing cattle and for meat? And so then you've got a point of comparison as well.
So how do you find the line between telling the story that you want to tell without letting your messaging get in the way?
Right, because once you've got all of that off your chest, almost, you can start writing the story, and you can start focusing on plot and character web and development and, you know, the beats that you want to hit. And then it just kind of, you just weave it in and link it in. And it's kind of like a by the way. And you kind of assume all of that once you've got your timeline written. And so you don't have to hit the reader over the head, because you're not thinking it through and trying to make a point. It's just very gentle. It's like, oh, well, of course it is. And you don't need to. There's an onboarding process as well, right? So there's some things that they do need to know, some shit that they don't need to know. And in fact, you talked about this in the Matrix breakdown that you did.
What did I say?
Well, you talked about how, like, you know that you open with this world and you're not, it's none of it's explained to you, but you know that something's a little bit off, you know, like the squeegee on the window, and you know, the things that it's not quite right, and it feels like a little bit of a dream world. And then you see, so you don't get Morpheus explaining everything until slap bang in the middle, actually, in the middle of the whole movie. And then it all kind of becomes apparent. And the beauty of doing something like that is that you've got lots and lots of stuff for page turners and reveals kind of layered in. So it's not just plot that's providing the reveals, it's also the world that's kind of giving you that.
Yeah, and that's great then. That means you're saying that story takes precedence over messaging, which I think is the only way this works, because I do believe that you can affect social change through story, absolutely. But I think that as soon as it becomes about social change and not the story, it's too easy to unplug from the narrative and not take it seriously. And you know, I had a friend, we went back and forth on this a lot, where they were very insistent on there has to be gender equality in every story that you tell, and like all these rules. And I'm like, no, because then it's the story is taking a back seat to an agenda. And I think that whenever you do that, it makes your story less than it could be. Like it should be story first, and you should, because I think that what you're saying, if I'm understanding this correctly, is to have very clear intentions on what kind of story you want to tell, what message you want to put in that story, what social change you hope to create. and then tell the very best story that you possibly can within those parameters, but not to just be so dogged about having to get this message out there that you sacrifice the elements of what makes it fun.
We joked about propaganda earlier, but honestly, I think the key here is keeping that metaphor in mind, because you can't, well, propaganda is maybe a little heavy-handed, but certainly subliminal, because the minute that people look at your story and they say just really, really obviously, like, this is a story about how to stop global warming, or, it's just, it becomes very heavy. Yeah, and people
this is liberal propaganda. I'm not reading it.
Right, you're going to get people who disagree bitching about it, and you're going to get even people who agree. People are reluctant to take direct instructions. You do this. No, people don't like that. People don't like having stuff, set upon them. People like the idea of, it's inception. It's like, oh, I had this idea.
Right.
You didn't. Society gave you this idea, but you think it's your idea.
I think a lot of people are very resistant to reading stories where they feel like they're being preached at.
Yep.
So how do you avoid that? How do you, or do you not avoid it and you just write for your audience? But if you are writing for just your audience, are you then just not preaching to the already converted? Are you able to make a change if you're just saying stuff they already believe? So where that's a fine line. How do you figure that out?
Yeah, and I guess it's a personal thing. It depends whether you want your stuff to go mainstream. And I couldn't agree more, Dave. Like, if you're doing it like kind of preaching and it's all on the nose, it's just going to turn people off. It doesn't even make for a good story. So I think it has to be subtle.
Well, then you feel like you're being lectured. You feel like you're being lectured, and people are looking to escape for entertainment. The thing is, it really does steep into our subconscious. Like, it just does. Like, I think that the things that I've watched over the last 10 years have greatly affected who I am. They affect the stories I want to tell and why I want to tell them and the ways that I want to tell them. But I can't, but I've also seen stuff that's a little ham-fisted and I turn it right off. Like, I'm just like, okay, I don't really feel like being.
Yeah, I think you want to normalize, not preach.
Yes.
It's a little bit like, it's like, okay, so if you've ever ridden in a car with children, and they say, "Hey, can we get ice cream?"
Dave's written that story. It has a
trunk, though.
The kids are back there saying, "Hey, can we get ice cream? Hey, can we get ice cream?" And you're like, "I don't know. We'll see. I don't know. We'll figure it out. Hey, can we get ice cream? I don't know. And then after a certain point, the question suddenly changes to, how much ice cream can we get? And it's like, I didn't agree to getting it. And suddenly they're treating it as if getting it is a foregone conclusion. So now you're just, how much are you going to get? It's a little bit like that. It's a little bit like, you don't want to say, if this occurs, then we can work together to change the world, blah, 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 blah. It's a little bit more like the post-apocalyptic counterexample that you gave at the beginning, which is like, well, here's how it is, and that's normal. And if you get enough of something, then that's normal. It's my alternate sexuality characters example earlier. You don't necessarily have to tell a story about that movement. If you include characters who represent that viewpoint, then it just becomes normal.
Well, and you don't shine a light on it. Like, by not shining a light on it, you're shining a light on it. You're saying this is normal. This is not a big deal. Why am I making a big deal? I'm not making a big deal about this because it's not a big deal. And that's the thing. I think Bakes does this really well too in the comments. As a reader, if I see you tricking me as I read, I get ticked. But if I figure out after the story, I think, well done.
And I think that applies even to, ideologies that I agree with. When I'm reading something that I completely am 100% down with, but it feels like I'm almost like shifted to, well, how would somebody of an opposite political spectrum think about this book, and how would they feel about it? And I'm very sensitive to that. But I do agree with what you were saying earlier. Back in the day, gay people were demonized. They were portrayed as monsters. They were portrayed as deviants that would, steal your children and turn them gay and molest them or whatever. And that is very much one of those things that having gay people in television shows where it wasn't a big deal, even if early on, I think they were like lampooned and made fun of in a way that I think a lot of like gay people wouldn't like today. But I think that sort of helped pull them into, like, they're one of us. They're just like us. They have families they love, and all these other. They're not these deviants that you think they are. They're normal. they're a little bit different in one way, but that doesn't discount anything else. They're humans just like us, and they're your friends, they're your family, they're your neighbors, and it's, I think, realizing that it's a very subtle shift, and I think that did more to bring gay rights forward than anything else, just having them in television.
Yeah, look at something like Sense8, right? Where
that's very late in the game, though. I mean, that's just recent.
Well, right, but look at how far they take it, right? Like these are not, it's not big plot points. I mean, her relationship with her mother is a plot point, but other than that, no. Like there's gay and trans characters that the script is never apologizing for those characters. And that's happened before in the past. If you rewind 10 or 15 years, you may have had a character like that, but the script finds some way to apologize to the viewer. And Sense8 and a lot of other stuff doesn't do that. So even Transparent, which is another good example, that's what the show is about. So it's not, by the way, Transparent is like the best name for that show ever. It's so good. But that's something specific. Like that's what that show is about, is that change. Where Sense8 impresses me a lot more because it has trans characters that are just because. And I don't think that could have existed 10 years ago, maybe even 5. Like it seems like we've officially are in a new place, and it's because people who are telling stories are able to have that latitude.
Right, and Sean, I ended up talking to a political consultant. Like she's a real life Olivia Pope. You've seen Scandal? Scandal, yeah. So she's like Olivia Pope, and we were talking movies and movie development, and apparently there was a law in Hollywood that said that you weren't allowed for a happy ending for a gay couple. So they always had to be tragedy. They always had to kill themselves, and it always had to be this kind of moral thing. But because they were gay, they had to end up, in the pit. And what happened was, even when that law was kind of rescinded or overwritten, you'd had this generation of film directors and producers who had been brainwashed into thinking, oh, that's just the way it is, and they don't even question it, and they carried on kind of just creating those kind of movies. And so, as you're saying, it's only recently that we're starting to kind of wake up to shit, what are we hypnotizing ourselves with, and let's do something a little bit more realistic and a little bit more positive.
Well, it's like we talk a lot. In fact, just the last episode we recorded with Christine, we were talking about the stories that we tell ourselves. Right? The stories that we tell ourselves, and then we get lost in our same loops and patterns. We're making the same mistakes because we're not able to break away from our habits because we're telling ourselves the same stories. But as a culture, we do that. As a species, we do that. We tell ourselves the same stories, and then it just becomes the self-fulfilled prophecy, and we're not really able to shatter that wall, even though it really is membrane thin if we look at it that way.
Right.
So I have a question for you is, I'm thinking about, like, you show by example, and actually the idea of the gay characters had to have the tragic ending. It sort of made me think of this. Is, again, I'm going back to, we've had so many post-apocalyptic stories. This is just kind of how it is. So that would be kind of a negative thing. But conversely, like, where's the argument, or is there an argument for, this is a warning? Do you not want it like this? Then don't allow what is encouraging these post-apocalyptic worlds. Where do you think the line is there?
Well, I think the problem is that we're brainwashed with whatever we see. So it's kind of like the brain doesn't know. How in personal development we're told that, and NLP, we're told that what you imagine, the brain doesn't know the difference between that and what's actually reality. So you can imagine yourself into a better scenario, right? And I think it's the same with movies, and the same with violence and video games. Like, yeah, of course you know that Grand Theft Auto isn't real life, and kids know that if they're asked, but you're still kind of brainwashing, you're systematically desensitizing yourself to violence. You're kind of subconsciously just accepting it. And our subconscious rewires with the proteins, no matter what, whether we're telling ourselves, oh, it's not real, it's not real, it's not real, it's still being exposed to it and still picturing those things. So I
used to play Grand Theft Auto Vice City, and then I'd go somewhere with Cindy, and she would turn from the passenger seat and say, "You've been playing Grand Theft Auto, haven't you?" Like, because it does, like, you're just a little more aggressive. Like,
I would like to argue that Grand Theft Auto is very lifelike if you live in Florida, okay? I just want to say that.
But my question is, do all of the examples, all of these sort of subliminal hints that we're trying to create with these stories for social change, they all need to be positive ones? Because think about, like, if you wanted to talk about climate change, and so you told a story about the world going to shit because, like, the day after tomorrow, and you wanted to tell that story, it's sort of the same thing as like a post-apocalyptic story. Well, we let the government have too much power. They created this, therefore don't let the government have too much power. So where is the line where it's normalizing it like Grand Theft Auto? And where is the line where it's like, this is a warning and actually is a good example of encouraging social change through story?
Right. So are you still there?
Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. My headset hit this. Sorry. So what I'm thinking, if I'm understanding the question correctly, is that the thing about using it as a warning isn't as helpful as we might think, because it's still showing the post-apocalyptic disaster, and we're programming ourselves to think that disaster is going to happen. I mean, I don't think anyone looks at something like the day after tomorrow and then comes away going, oh, I must use less gas, or let's go and campaign for, I think we need to see solutions. And this is what I was saying about the interviews. Like, a lot of people can talk about the problems in the world and, the violence and, all this kind of stuff. I think there's so much of that, and we're just kind of couching ourselves back in the problem, even if it is a warning, even though we're saying we don't want that, we don't want that, we don't want that. We need to reorientate and say, okay, well, what are the solutions? And so then we start to think, well, there are possibilities. You wouldn't believe the number of people that I've had like political discussions with, and they go, oh yeah, but that's just the way it is. Oh, well, you can't change any of that, or it's too powerful. But if we had
Dave.
Yeah.
People.
Why bother? Why bother?
Why bother? Right, but this is the problem. Too many people are saying why bother, because they don't believe that we have the power to make a difference. But through the stories, if we have enough instances of possibilities, we don't even know what the right answer is. We just need to know that there is this possibility on the other side, and look, these are some possible kind of technologies or social norms that we need to adopt in order to allow it to be possible.
So it's don't focus on the problem, focus on the solution. So just to take the example that I already gave, which I know this is kind of a shit example, but let's say you did want to talk about environmental impact, then rather than doing the day after tomorrow, you do, and this is the part where the analogy falls apart, you do a story about a bunch of people who really like recycling or something. You know what I mean? Like, I know that sucks, but right? Like, that's the idea, the solution to the problem.
Yeah.
But then you're, see, I think the reason, I agree with what you're saying, and I like the idea of like reframing something so you're not thinking about the negative, you're thinking about the possibilities. I like that. However, fiction, generally speaking, is about conflict.
Yes.
So how do you get around that? How do you get around that?
Great question. Okay, so does conflict always have to come from the system or the world? The embodiment of the story?
No.
Oh, where else could it come from?
Well, we have interpersonal conflict. I mean, conflict can come from anywhere. Conflict can always be an external source. But so what you're saying, if I'm understanding correctly, is that you can build a utopia and then have conflict within the utopia.
Right. Or what if it isn't quite a full utopia? Like, let's take the recycling one, and they have problems with the recycling plant, and if not, something horrible could happen. So they have to come up with another solution rather than recycling, and they have to find another energy source or something, or a new machine. I
would like you to write a book. This is my challenge to you. Write a book where you make recycling sound awesome and fun.
So recycling is going to be sexy by the time I finish with it.
I am excited to read that. I also have just a general question. Do you think that if we fix Dave, we can fix the world?
and also, is there a possibility? Can Dave ever write a story that conforms to what you're suggesting is good for the world? Because I'm thinking there's no CI story.
We all don't have to write the same stories. She's not saying that. If you want to write that story, I'm still going to write my story.
Dave, when have you ever focused on the solution?
I focus on solutions. They're just a little different.
Strange solutions.
Oh, bless. I think it's great. Well, no, I think Dave could, if someone else built the world and Dave just did the character conflict, and oh my God, he could come up with really dramatic ways of how it could all go terribly wrong.
Of course.
What if you write a post-apocalyptic story, but there's a lot of gay people in that story? What if you just kind of handle one issue at a time? You know what I mean? I'm being a little sarcastic. My point was,
Vic, someone rescue John.
like, my point is, that
I'm not rescuing him.
I was just thinking how none of like Dave's stories are always the negative example of the darkness, and I thought as long as he addresses one issue, then we'll take a pass on the other issues.
I'm gonna write a recycling story, but it'll.
Dave,
yeah.
you and me, let's do a recycling story.
Dave,
Okay.
why
Yeah,
don't
but Dave's
you?
are recycling humans. You just know
Yeah,
it.
yeah, it's going to be. It's going to be recycling.
The next Mauricio you guys do, make that motherfucker recycle.
I think Dave's next Dark Crossing story is called Recycling Babies.
I'm thinking of that first Mauricio chapter in Yesterday's Gone, and he's thinking about how he didn't sort his single stream recycling properly.
And that would improve the scene for sure.
Right.
So, okay, Laura, do you want to talk specifically
About
about your summit? And because I know that's kind of what you're gearing up for and where a lot of this think tank will actually be actualized.
Right. Okay. So the interviews go into a free summit, and then we do the think tank off the back of that. So do I give a website here, or do you want me to talk a little bit more about what's happening?
Yes, yes, definitely give a URL, but talk
I will
about
give
what
the
it is.
URL, storytellingforsocialprofit.com.
Johnny, go Johnny.
There you go.
What about the dates? When is this all happening?
Is she a little low for us?
Little bit.
Okay. You can bring the mic a little bit closer. You just got a little bit low a minute ago.
Oh, is that better?
I don't know.
Okay. Is that okay? Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Sorry. What about the dates, Johnny? What dates are we doing it?
Well, I'm going to leave that one to you.
Good pivot, Johnny.
There you go.
I'll get you with recycling. January 23rd to 29th is when the interviews go live. So these interviews are with experts from different areas. We've got some filmmakers and some story experts and so on, but we've also got people who operate in the real world. So we've got peacekeepers on nation building and rebuilding. We've got futurists in in the areas of webisodes, filmmaking, publishing. We've got developmental psychologists, cultural historians. We've got people talking about racism and women's issues and equality and LGBT equality. We've actually got the world's leading authority on storytelling in virtual reality. We've got aid workers, people who are changing the economies of whole countries.
Damn, son.
Education. Sorry?
That's just awesome. That's a great lineup.
I know. Oh, well, here's the other thing. Okay, so the paid thing is the think tank later on, and we've got a whole bunch of classes for storytellers to show them how to do the world building and stuff. And all our profits are going to two causes. One is to help get homeless LGBT youth off the streets, because we found that that's a tipping point in creating real change. And the rest of it is going to, so a friend of mine has started keeping girls in secondary education in Uganda, because that's a massive tipping point as well. So they found that by keep helping them get educated and go off to university and stuff, they were able to come back, and this is all they want to do. They want to come back and help their own communities and provide affordable healthcare and all this kind of thing. Also, in educating them, they have fewer children, so they're better resourced to be able to help their families and lift themselves out of poverty. So, the think tank's going to be all about looking at the what are these tipping points, and how do we, affect one of these variables to create the biggest amount of change. But actually, the money that we raise through doing this is going to go to actually making it happen. So. And
from the flip perspective, a lot of it's free. Like the summit itself is free. I just want to underscore that.
Yeah. All of the interviews are free, and the interviews are keep looping back to, okay, so what does this mean to story? We've got actually Chris Fox. You guys know Chris Fox, don't you?
Of course.
Yeah. So he's doing a thing on world building and how to weave these topics into the story systematically. And of course, for those who don't know him, he's like a sci-fi writer, like just does Baseballs on Kindle, and so he'll probably talk about Kindle and making sure that you can sell your stuff as well. So there's all of this free information that's there, and all you have to do is go get registered.
Yeah, he's the world's leading authority on dense beard growth, actually.
What? What'd you call it?
Dense beard growth.
Dense beard growth, all right. I thought that was Dave.
No, Dave's beard isn't nearly as dense as Chris's.
He's beat me.
So storytellingforsocialprofit.com. Just a reminder again, those are all going to be free interviews. And then
I would just add that I think it is important, even if you're one of those authors who says, I kind of just want to tell my story. I just want to have fun. I think that you're naturally putting your belief system into your books, no matter what. Like whether you are doing it with intention or not, that is what happens. When Dave and I sit to tell a story, there are common elements to those stories because it's the way that we put stories together. There are certain ways that Dave sees the world, and it's very evident in those stories.
Accurately.
And then when Johnny and I tell stories, there's something very specific about a Realm and Sand story. It has a certain vibe. It's a question we're trying to answer to ourselves. And that's the thing. When you are creating, just try to create with intention, because whether you want to or not, you're putting your belief systems into your work, even if it's subtle. So why not take the time to be a little bit more aware of what you're saying and what difference that might make, over time, especially if you're lucky enough, if you're fortunate enough to be one of those authors who actually builds a career that's big and people look for your releases and you become one of their favorite authors, then you are going to be affecting the way they think, even if it's in a small, subtle way. So, inherit that responsibility and do something positive with it, and know that you are responsible for this.
Somebody's got to counteract Frank Darabont. Somebody's got to do it. So anything else to add about the summit, Laura, before we close up?
No, I think we kind of covered everything. The only other thing that I'd say is by doing these interviews, and obviously I was watching the interview. You guys would be watching the interviews, right? There are story ideas that naturally fall out of it, because we're looking at tweaking variables, and as soon as you pull one of these variables, a whole cascade of other stuff happens, and these are the kind of things that make cool plot. So even if you're not interested in going and changing the world in that big way, it's definitely rich fodder for story and plot lines.
Yeah, a lot of ideas that I get are not even related to story. I'm listening to some, news or NPR or something, and you're
going to say Radio 4 then.
I'm not in the UK, so.
But they all have British accents, Dave.
Well, then I'm gonna have to listen to that.
He has an app that changes all of his local newscasters from sounding like Florida into intelligent sounding Brits.
They should have meant that.
Yeah. Do you want to drop the URL again and the dates?
Okay, so the URL is Storytelling for Social Profit, and the dates are January 23rd to 29th.
They will watch and listen live, yes?
Oh, no, they're pre-recorded, so they go out. So you need to be registered before 23rd, because then you'll get all of the links come through to you.
There you go. So that's a big deal, because a lot of people aren't going to be able to be like, well, I'm at my computer from this time to this time, and I'm going to sit there. So you'll get the links.
Johnny would never attend that live.
But not live, I wouldn't. But I would.
I would passively.
Well, it's a lot of information, and also. People want to take notes on some things, and you might not be interested in other things. So we just thought that the best way to, and also it would be a scheduling nightmare to make that happen. So we just thought, have them recorded, and then they'll be up live for X number of days, and then we'll just roll it out gradually over the time of the summit. So yeah.
All right. So thanks everybody for listening. Thank you, Laura, for being on to talk about storytelling for social profit, or social change through stories. And to the rest of you, storytellingforsocialprofit.com. Get in there, and that's it. So thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks, everyone, for listening.
Thanks so much, and thanks, guys.